Welcome back to the Wild West Tennis Podcast. And good day, mate, to some of you out there. I'm really excited, bro. Steve. I just want to tell you, I'm up for this podcast probably because I'm sitting here talking to a Hall of Famer, class of 2017. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, that's right. It's hard to believe it's been 5.5 years, but it has.
That's amazing. Yeah. And a stellar class it was. I'm going to ask you about that later, just for my own curiosity. But I also know you've been doing this for 50 years, so maybe you know a little bit about this sport of tennis. Give us the update on Novak Djokovic. Obviously, he's into the semifinals, and just, if you would, let us know about how you thought he looked last night against Rublev.
Yeah, I think he's been very close to the peak of his powers the last two matches. He was not in the first 3 rounds. He played well enough. He only lost one set in the first 3 rounds and managed to beat Dimitrov in straight, despite the fact that he was still hurting and needing medical timeouts. But then against Alex de Minaur, and then finally last night again against Rublev, he won those matches back-to-back, 2-1 and 2, and 1-2 and 4. I mean, he really routined them, as they say. And the injury's not gone, Brad. I mean, I did notice toward the end of the third set of the Rublev match, he was stretching the leg out again. You could see the hamstring was of some concern still. So it's not over with the management of that injury, but he clearly has been much more comfortable the last 2 rounds. He's picked up a ton of confidence by playing so well against first-rate opposition, and now here he is in the semifinals, and he can almost taste the title. And of course, he'll meet Tommy Paul in the semis. But I think he's got to be very, very happy to have come as far as he has from pre-tournament psyche when he was not even sure he was going to play.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What's interesting to me, just thinking about this, how many sets has he dropped in this tournament?
Just one in the second round. He let a tiebreaker in the second set, got away from him in the second round, but he won all 3 other sets. The 3 remaining sets he won with ease, and that's it. Otherwise, it's been pretty straightforward, and he's conserved energy as a result. And you definitely want to do that when you're have an injury like this, because he mentioned in the interview with Jim Courier on court last night that he's spending most of his time with his physio on machines to make sure that leg is right. So rather than hitting tennis balls on his day off, that's what he's doing. And it's typical of his professionalism and his dedication and his determination that he would approach it that way. But there's no doubt it's a serious injury in the sense that the only way you can really defeat it is to stay off that leg for a while, not play. I mean, like I'm sure after the Australian, he'll take a good stretch of at least 10 days probably without picking up a racket. So it's been a fascinating, it's reminiscent in some ways, Brad, of 2 years ago when he had an abdominal tear, and he hurt it in the Taylor Fritz match in the 3rd round. And when the match ended, when they couldn't have crowds, they actually had to send the crowds home in the middle of that match. That was because of COVID.
Right.
And they had a curfew, and they sent the spectators out. So by the time the match ended against Fritz, and he finally finished it off in 5 after winning the first 2 sets and dropping the 3rd and 4th, he screamed out in utter relief. It was remarkable. I've heard the clip many times, and you could just tell he was so glad that he was still in the tournament because he wasn't sure he could survive that injury. And then something similar happened where he wasn't practicing on days off. And then you just saw him get gradually better from Raonic in the fourth round to Zverev in the quarters to Karatsev in the semis, and then finally Medvedev in the final. It seemed like he got a bit better with every match, and his movement improved with every match. Here, that seems to be the case too, but he's just still going to have to be very careful to not aggravate that injury. That hamstring is delicate.
It's remarkable because we know how ritualistic and routines are so critical to players, that not hitting business. You wrote about it in your book, the book about Pete Sampras. What was it, 2000, Steve, that he didn't practice on his off days?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That was the record breaker when he won his 7th Wimbledon, which was a record at the time, later surpassed by Federer with 8, but also his record-breaking 13th major. He moved one past Roy Emerson at the time, so he was on a quest to win that title. It was the 13th. It was probably larger of the quest rather than the second title. But yes, he couldn't. He heard it in the second round, so it was very similar to what back in that sense that. Yeah, after the second round, prior to Gimelstob in the third, he was not hitting on his off days. He managed to finally get a little light practice in the day before the Rafter final that year, but similar, and everybody knew about it. The difference, Pete being the outstanding sportsman that he is and such an honorable man, nobody could question his motives. Everybody knew it was a legitimate injury. And what saddened me about this case is Djokovic deserves much better than this, is that there are the skeptics out there questioning the legitimacy, questioning whether it's really authentic. And that I find really objectionable, because to me, it's so obvious that he's had anybody that was watching Adelaide and saw it originally occur, and he went running wide for a forehand and came up lame after that shot. And then eventually at the end, after he held on for 5-2, he took a medical timeout in that semifinal. Eventually won it in straight, but you knew he had a real issue on his hands. And then it's been even more obvious during this tournament with the bandaging. You see it on the left leg, all the bandaging or whatever you call that, the wrapping. And that can't be fun, by the way, to wear that. You don't want, that's not something you really want to deal with. And then having some of those medical timeouts in the earlier rounds too. Do you really want that? Do you want to have a medical timeout when you're up 2-0, 4-1, 2 breaks against Dimitrov in the third set? No, you want to keep going. You don't want to slow down. So that to me is the only. That's to me is the one part that really I find disturbing. That some of the press and some of the fans can't accept the fact that this is a great competitor who does not need to make excuses, who's trying to establish himself as the greatest player of all time, or at least the greatest of this generation, of a great generation. And I don't think he should be questioned on this. Yes, the young Djokovic, Brad, it's true that he retired, and he'd be the first to admit it, that maybe there were times that he should have fought on and not retired mid-match. And he wasn't this, but once he turned the corner mid-career by, say, 2010, nobody should question this man's, desire to compete, and also the fact that he's the last guy that has to make excuses.
That was what the point I was going to make. I mean, really, come on, 21 Grand Slams. That's not enough. All the records. Come on, guys. I mean, he's basically strapped up. He's like a mummy. That kind of like bandaging. It's nuts.
It is, and the notion, Brad, that somehow this was, this was like a tactic to put it as if it was gamesmanship. That's silly. I mean, if you're an opponent and you see that wrapping, so you're not going to get distracted by it. You're just going to say, okay, Novak may not be 100% physically. I'm going to work him hard. I'm going to make him win every point. They're professionals. They know what they're doing. It's not a disadvantage to them. If anything, it can be a benefit to them that they know that he has some kind of an injury that's on his mind.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask you, Steve. I haven't seen him play that much. Are people trying to drop shot him? Are they doing anything different to try to pick on that injury? I mean, I would do anything I could to.
Yeah, I mean, they're not really, not much of that. I have to say, he's hitting the ball so well that he's been dictating and taking control of these matches, that they haven't had many opportunities. And obviously, a Rublev, that's not really his game. De Minaur, I don't think so either. Grigor mixed it up pretty well. Grigor did a smart match, Dimitrov, but he hasn't given them too many chances to start trying to outmaneuver him, because he's been so much in charge and his ball striking has been so exemplary.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't go, it's not the kind of thing that if he ends up going all the way and tying Rafa by getting the 22nd major, there's no asterisks. Who cares? Doesn't matter. It's silly to me that people make an issue out of this.
Well, silly, but to me, it's also disrespectful. It's like, hey, look, hasn't he earned the right to be taken at face value? And is he going to go to the extreme of putting that wrapping on? And
Yeah.
nobody wants that. No, that's not going to help you to move around the court more swiftly. It gets back to your word. It's silly. I'd go as far as saying it's ludicrous and
asinine, if you will,
yeah.
Because come on, he's not practicing somewhere secretly indoors, and that's why I don't think the players have said anything about it. It's been more speculation from certain members of the media, and
yeah, that's true.
Okay, fine, sure, well, that's fine. We see it the other way, and they have their thinking on it, but I don't think.
You know what, Brad? You know what? They're only raising his motive. They're only making him more motivated. So in a strange way, those skeptics are doing Djokovic a favor.
They are.
He already has in the back of his mind the bad treatment he got when he came over last year trying to play and trying to get the exemption because he had not taken the vaccine. And he understood all along that there was going to be no guarantee that he'd be let into the country, but he was. Then we know what a fiasco the whole thing turned into. And it left a bad taste in his mouth, I think, because he was made to look like some kind of a criminal. When in fact he flew over there because Tennis Australia told him you have the exemption. Then everything went awry from there, and we know that originally they were going to let him in the tournament, and then the Minister of Sports stepped in and said, no, he's going home. And it was a very unpleasant experience and very demeaning. And by the way, not very well reported. Because
where was the follow-up, Steve?
The follow-up, exactly. There should have been a follow-up with Craig Tiley, the tournament director, to get an explanation from him on how this all got so out of hand, and there was such poor communication between his part of the government and the federal government. You know, that there was something went terribly wrong there. But also, I mean, it wasn't reported well from the standpoint of the non-tennis networks, the CNN types who were trying to do it as a news story. Were not really entirely fair to Djokovic. You can say all you want. It's perfectly fair game to question him for not taking the vaccine. Most people believe you should take the vaccine, but he took a stance. I wish he would have taken the vaccine. But the fact is, he didn't hide the fact that he hadn't. They knew that he hadn't. He understood the risk that entailed. And he shouldn't have been put in the position where he lands in the country and then the next 9 days turn into utter chaos, and eventually he's led back to the airport and told to go home. That should easily have been avoided. So I do put some blame on Craig Tiley for the fact that they didn't get their signals right and didn't communicate properly. At least it appears they didn't with the federal government, so that Novak could know what he was walking into, or know that there was a good chance that they were going to say, no, you're not coming in the country. Now, meanwhile, they, of course, had already let a women's doubles player in her late 30s.
That's right.
She didn't play the Australian Open, but she played a pre-tournament. She played one of the other tournaments, and then they eventually told her she had to leave, or at the very least go to the same detention center where Djokovic was living. So it was a fiasco. And so I'm just saying, Brad, that's all of that is on the back of his mind. I think he felt mistreated. I don't think he would have had any problem, by the way, just so the listeners understand. Had he been told by Tiley, I spoke to the federal government authorities, to me, there's about a 5% chance this is going to work out, Novak. I don't like the looks of this. I would advise you not to come. I'm really sorry. We were fine with it, but they're not. In which case, he doesn't get on a plane, and his whole image is different from what it was. The whole public perception of him would have been drastically different than it was. In any case, that's all I think in the back of his mind right now. That's already giving him extra incentive. And then for people to question the injury this year, again, he uses those moments and the skeptics and what he would regard as unfair criticism to his benefit. But it just makes him play harder and work harder and even be more determined to take his 10th Australian Open title. Yeah,
I mean, turning a negative into a positive, and you're right. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he does go ahead and get it. Would it be his 10th title?
Yeah,
Steve?
This would be 10. Yeah, this would be.
obviously that'll come up. So we'll see. We wish him the best of luck. Mainly, just I want him to be able to play his matches with the injury. If he wins or not, that's fine. I admire the player, but I'm from the U.S. and he's playing an American Tommy Paul, who, there's a lot that can be said about Tommy Paul. You did a pretty extensive profile on him a few years ago, I believe. Was that right?
I did, yeah. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I want to say 19. But yes, Tommy was very likable, very modest. At that time, talking about wanting to win a title. And he's come a long ways. It's remarkable what he's done in the last, say, year and a half. And,
Yeah.
And he's a total professional now. He beat Ben Shelton in the All-American quarterfinal clash last night, which lived up to his expectations, because I felt going in they surely would have at least one tiebreak. They did, and it was the critical first set, which went to 8-6. Paul pulls out the tiebreak 8-6, and that carried him comfortably through the second set. But then he went up 4-3, 30-love in the third. It looked like he was going to close it out. Lost the set. Shelton exuberantly wins that set because he's quite a charismatic character on the court. And then Tommy Paul was all business, got an early break in the fourth, and kept on going. So he deservedly is, and he's going to move into the top 20. The projected rankings are taking him into the top 20 after this tournament, and as it stands now, with just even losing in the semis. And I think he'll give it his all against Djokovic. I think he's outclassed in that match, obviously, but I don't think he'll just go out there with a defeatist attitude. And that's Tommy will make it fun and make it interesting and make Novak work hard in the rallies, because it's pretty solid up both sides. His backhand, I think, is more solid, but his forehand, you can't allow him too much time in the middle of the court, or he'll hit winners. And go ahead.
Well, he's one of those interesting players that's I heard he signs autographs left-handed.
Yeah.
Got to help on the backhand. I don't have the scouting report on him as much as I wish I did, but boy, the results are what gets my attention with him.
Well,
it's like,
in addition to what I was saying about the ground game, Brad,
big serve, right?
Yeah, well, it's pretty big. It's pretty big and it's pretty accurate. And Djokovic was really complimentary about Tommy Paul's motion.
Oh, okay.
It's a very pure service motion. He's watched him. He hasn't ever played him before head to head.
Right.
But he's watched him, and he's obviously he's obviously wary of that serve, and I'm sure he'll be looking at some tapes, and because you want to be able to start reading it quickly when he gets out there in that semifinal. But Tommy, there's no one great overwhelming strength, but he's such a good all around polished player, and I think he'll be pretty loose. He knows, barring a 2-1-2 thumping. Anything he does better than that is a bonus, because he saw what happened to De Minaur. He saw what happened to Rublev. He knows how good they are. He'll go out and give it his all. And I think the odds still favor a Djokovic straight set win, but I think maybe one or two closer sets than what he's had against the other two. And Tommy will compete hard. I'm looking forward to watching that match.
Oh boy, I am too. I like the idea that he can play loose. There's nothing. Yeah, he should be able to play loose. And Brad Stein is such a great coach for a guy like Tommy Paul that he'll be incredibly prepared to face Novak Djokovic. And that's all we can ask of him. He's riding a nice wave of momentum. So it won't be a nervous situation. I think he can get a set. Steve, I'm going to actually give him a set. I think
I'd be surprised. I'd be a little surprised, but if he does it, he'll earn it. He'll earn it.
Yeah. I kind of hope he does.
I think Djokovic will probably have the same mindset he did in the previous two clashes, and that he's going to want to get off the court as fast as he can and win as efficiently as he can, so that he can just save the energy for the final. And he's serving well. It's been hard to break the whole tournament, and I think it's only happened 3 or 4 times altogether in the entire in the 5 matches. So it won't be easy, even though Tommy's a good returner. And I think sooner or later Novak will get onto that serve. It's not that he'll necessarily break him as much as he did De Minaur or Rublev, but I would think he'll get the breaks when he needs them. But it's going to be fun. I don't put it past Tommy to take this set. I I would be more inclined to think it goes straight sets to Novak. But I think it'll be high quality tennis. And I do think it'll be rhythmic because Tommy's not they're both going to enjoy the pace of the rallies and the rhythm of the rallies. And Novak may actually start using a lot of, I suspect he's going to use the slice backhand a lot in this match and the drop shot himself to break up Tommy's rhythm.
I was thinking the same thing. I think there'll be some, it really should live up to what a semifinal should be at a major. I certainly hope so.
And what do you think how do you feel about the other semifinal?
Tsitsipas and Khachanov. I don't know as much about Khachanov. I know he made the semis at the U.S. Open. I think he beat Nick Kyrgios in the quarterfinals.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen a lot of him play. Tsitsipas, I like. He's a character. I like him. I've grown to like him more than I did initially. And he's got a lot of support there from the fans, and he's had a great history in Australia. So I think he'll win. I think he'll beat the guy, but I don't know enough about his opponent, Khachanov. Maybe you.
Well, yeah, no, you know what, Brad? You put your finger on the key accomplishment was the semifinals of the last major. So two hard court and two major semifinals in succession is pretty good work.
Yeah.
And he looks very good to me. He looks actually like he's playing even better than he did at the Open. The ground game is so impressive. He's not missing much off either side. The serve is really immense. And what's been his failing in the past sometimes is a little bit fragile mentally. That hasn't been true here. For instance, when he played Korda last match, and everybody,
I was hoping you bring that up.
highly anticipated clash. He's up 5-2 in the first set, and he's cruising, and he'd gotten the early break, and everything looked fine. He didn't serve it out, and then Korda gets back to 5-all, and then you saw Khachanov, how eager he was to hold in the next game, and how much he was still. It was like, okay, forget about the fact that you didn't close out the set. Let's get back to business. He holds on, then eventually wins a very well-played tiebreak with a backhand down the line winner on the set point. And then obviously in the middle of the second quarter got hurt, so be it. But Khachanov has looked quite impressive to me. He beat Francis Tiafoe also. He looks quite mature. And so even though he's never beaten Tsitsipas, I'm thinking that this one could be pretty close based on his form and his attitude. And obviously Tsitsipas has been great the whole tournament, Brad. The only real test for him was Sinner in the fourth round. And he went 5 sets. He won the first 2, dropped the next 2, and then was served remarkably well in the big points in the 5th, and that carried him through. So he looks good. You know, Brad, what a record this guy's had in Australia, Stefanos, because it started in 19 when he got to his first semi. He beats Roger, loses to Rafa. In 21, he beats Rafa in 5 sets and gets to another semi. And then, you know, he got to a third semi. He's lost a couple to Medvedev in the semis. And now here he is in his fourth semifinal in Australia. But how many guys can say that at the Australian Open, they've beaten both Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer? He can. And so he loves this tournament. Obviously, the courts suit him. And he's looking as, you know, he had a good year last year, Brad. It wasn't as good as he would have liked, but he was pretty solid, especially at the end. And yeah, I feel like I agree with you. He should win that semi. He should win that semi, all things being equal. And I would say probably that one will be a 4-setter. Yeah.
And what else would be so sweet for a guy like Tsitsipas who's been sniffing at it, and he's been close. And if he were to win this tournament, not only does he capture his first major, he takes over the #1 ranking. And I would guess he would have to beat Novak in that process. I mean, that would be phenomenal.
I would guess the same. And also it would come down to the fact that Djokovic would also be in a position to reclaim the #1 ranking if he were to beat. So that would be nice to have that ranking on the line in the final. The interesting thing about that rivalry is that people forget is back in 18 and 19, when he was emerging and Novak was kind of getting used to this guy, nobody knew his game that well yet. He went on and won 2 of the first 3 matches he played against Djokovic.
Really?
Yeah, and both on hard courts, by the way. And then
that's a shocker.
Since then, 9 in a row for Novak. But that includes Stefanos leading 2-0 in the French Open final at 21 before Novak came back. That includes a 5-set French semi the year before. That includes a tiebreaker in the third indoors in Paris last year. In other words, there have been a number of really good matches among the 9. Then there have also been some straightforward Djokovic solid straight set wins as well. So it's an interesting rivalry. I mean, I think Djokovic, after he beat De Minaur, he sort of singled Tsitsipas out on the other half of the draw. He didn't say he was automatic to reach the final, but you could tell he felt like Tsitsipas had the most experience. Tsitsipas was playing well. Tsitsipas was, in his mind, is gearing himself up to win a major. So we'll see. That would be obviously a fun final to watch because they've had so many compelling matches over the last 3 or 4 seasons.
And such a contrast in styles as well. So it clicks, it checks all the boxes, right, Steve?
Yeah, it does. And I think the crowd would be kind of divided. I think there'll be a big contingent for Djokovic, Serbian fans. Tsitsipas will have his contingent as well. And it would be a highly charged occasion if that's what we get. So, we got to wait another day before those men's semis are played, but it's setting up very well. It looks, we seem to be headed for that Djokovic. All things being equal, I got to like both of their chances to get through to the final.
Well, so Tsitsipas and Khachanov aren't on the card for today?
No. I think they're gonna. It looks to me like it's just the women's semis today. And
is that right? Wow. So they have a 2 days off before they play their semis.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, in the past, those semifinals have been they've been split up. But I looked at the schedule, and unless they've changed it, that's the way it's going to be. That and I assume they'll put the Tsitsipas Khachanov will be the afternoon match, and then Djokovic and would play in the evening against Tommy Paul. I suspect because Novak's been playing night matches every time out, and then once you start doing that, you kind of try to give those players the extra rest time. I suspect that's how they'll want to schedule it.
That seems entirely fair. Well, then that allows us to then get to the women's semifinals. Vika, can we talk about Azarenka first, Steve? Not just that her next match, her semifinal match, but the win over Pegula, a rematch from Guadalajara. And if you recall, I was there for that match when they played in Guadalajara, and that would be Mexico.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Well, I thought Vika, I was pulling for Vika. I love her. She's a character. And, she had struggled. And I know you also appreciate her brand of tennis.
Oh, very much. No, frankly, I would love to see her come back and get a 3rd title. I just feel like, she's come close a few times, and it looked like she was going to win the Open a few years ago, and Naomi came back and beat her from a set down and won that final. But
that was in 2020, right?
Yeah, 2020, and Vika had beaten Serena in the semis. That would have been a really immensely satisfying win if she could have beaten Naomi.
And you said it went 3 sets? Did it go 3?
Yeah, it did. 1-3.
Yeah.
Good match. And it looked like Vika had her for a while, for about a set and a half, and it didn't happen. Good effort from Naomi. But I think it would be good for tennis. There's a number of good outlets. Maybe Sabalenka makes her breakthrough. There are other perfectly good scenarios. But like you, I like Azarenka's craftsmanship. I feel it's not just slugging. That there's a lot of thought that goes into it. That she's a very astute match player.
A lot of guile, cuttiness and guile for sure.
A lot of guile, knows how to break down her opponent's games and get the most out of her own. She's a masterful strategist. So I think tennis connoisseurs like Azarenka for that reason. Maybe she's not the easiest personality. She'd be the first one to admit it. But that doesn't really matter that much to me because I also don't think it causes any trouble.
I think it's charming. I find her charming now.
I do too. So I think it would be a terrific story if she were to come back and win here again, and the fans would love it. And she's a mother now. There's so many other aspects to it that are appealing.
Well, and in your second book, you had her in the greatest return of serves category, I believe. Would you still have her? That was 2012 when that came out. 10 years later, more or less, would you still have her at that level compared to her colleague?
I would. I think she's got a great return. I think that's actually why, even though she didn't beat Serena very often, and she lost a couple of really agonizing U.S. Open finals to Serena in 12 and 13, and 5-3 in the third in the former of those clashes, and lost it 3 sets again the next year. But part of the reason was, the primary reason in my view, was the return, because Serena knew that sooner or later she was going to break Vika. That was going to happen, but she couldn't feel terribly safe on her own serve. And it's rare that Serena would feel that way. And I suspect Serena would back me up, that as someone who faced it on the court and felt it on the court, that yes, I would still leave Azarenka's return right up there among the top 5 of all time.
Well, and facing the Wimbledon champ, Rabinka, I don't know if I pronounced it right. I get confused because they have a drink over there called Rabina, which is like a black currant drink. So I always
I think it's I'm going with Rybakina.
Rybakina, yeah. In my mind, it looks like
I know Rabina, it's a tricky name. It's a tricky name.
So, and because of I know Gilbert, I don't think Brad Gilbert's come up with a nickname for her yet. So hopefully he does. She continues to progress, but with her serve and Vika's return, we should be looking at a pretty interesting contest.
Oh, it's a great contest. It's a great contest. You know, if this was on grass, if this were on the center court, I'd go with Rybakina pretty comfortably. But in this setting, it's a pick-em match. Could be a great match. And I'm looking forward to that one. And look, I'm not going to be upset if Rybakina kind of adds to her own legitimacy by getting the finals here, or perhaps winning a second major. So I don't have a problem with that either. But I just think the Vika story, you kind of want to see her strike in the next few years. She may have 2 or 3 more really good years, but you feel like this is an opportunity she's going to want to take.
I think you're right about her. And from what I hear, from her in press, the maturity, she had issues with anxiety. There was kind of a thing that in her last press conference she really talked a lot about. So she's come past a lot of those hurdles, and she seems to be the furthest thing from burnt out that you could look at. She loves it. She knows she's lucky to still be healthy and playing well. Why not enjoy the ride?
Yeah, no, I think she is, and that's going to be a very appealing semifinal. And I suspect, I don't know, I can't say that either one, that Sabalenka is not going to beat either one of them, but I just want to see. I'd like to see Vika get a crack at Sabalenka in the final. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and so we have to touch on that because she plays a Polish player that I have not seen her. I don't even think I've seen a photo of her. I'm ashamed to say, because I know she's had a good Australian summer so far with the United Cup, and I think getting to a final in Sydney. So she's an informed player. What do you know about her? Have you seen her?
Yeah, no, you sized it up well, and I watched her beat Pliskova. That was a good. Pliskova was sort of was resurgent, was looking a little bit more like her old self, and like the player who'd been in the finals of Wimbledon and the Open.
Yeah.
And this girl shut her down pretty nicely in straight sets. It was 7-5 in the second set, and Pliskova had a 5-4 lead on serve. So I'm impressed with her. I'm impressed. That's not going to be any kind of cakewalk for Sabalenka. But
Lynette is the last name.
What's that?
No, I was just Lynette is the last name. If I didn't screw that one up.
Oh no, Lynette. I think Lynette is it. But Sabalenka, what I like about her, Brad, is that she's very composed right now, and she's gotten over her double fault syndrome, which for a while was scary.
Thank God.
She could serve 17, 18, 19 doubles in a match and just be completely flustered by it and bewildered by it. That seems to be behind her. And now that is behind her, we saw her play really, really well at the end of last year at WTA championships. And, she's playing the most consistent brand of tennis we've ever seen from her. And we've always known how great she was off the ground. Now that the serve has come true for her, I suppose if I had to just looking at it strictly analytically, I think she's the favorite to take the title.
The last person that had the yips like that was Safina. Remember?
Yeah.
Woes?
Yeah.
And you hate to see it. There's nothing more brutal in tennis than that. When they get those yips, 18 double faults in a match, that's hard to watch.
Think about Anna Kournikova as well. Put her on.
Yeah. So it's a Russian thing.
So I think Sabalenka, all credit to her, because it took her a long time to get over this issue, which I think is an internal one too. I mean,
sure.
It's not as if, I can't believe she was going out on the practice court with her coaches and serving all these doubles. It was getting in her head, and I'm sure they were constantly working with her, whether it was more kick, more slice, alter the toss, whatever they were telling her. I'm sure in practice she was able to do it, and then she'd get in the match and she'd fall apart. But it looks to me, I'm fingers crossed, like those days are over, and we're not going to see any more double-digit double faults from her in matches. It's just, I hope it never happens again. And barring a sudden reemergence of that, which would be sad, I think she's the player to beat. But I would look forward to seeing either Rybakina or particularly Azarenka taking her on in a hard-fought final and pushing her to her limits.
I'm with you. I mean, I like the sentimental favorite of Azarenka, and the fact that she is old. She's 33, I believe, so less chances. Rybakina has one, so that's kind of nice. So I'm okay with it too, because we could have a first-time major winner. That's always nice. But I'm also with you, Steve. You love it when they win a major and back it up. You like it, and especially with the women, that the consistency factor, which is one of the reasons I think you were so disappointed when Barty retired. You like that?
Well, because Barty, let's face it, Brad. I mean, it makes me. There was another player you and I both enjoyed watching
very much,
named Justine Henin.
Oh, I thought you were going to say.
And Justine, here she was, a dominant force at the French. She won the Australian. She won the US. She had a spectacular career, but the one major she never won was Wimbledon. And she had 2 finals at Wimbledon, lost one to Venus, and then she lost again to Mauresmo. And I felt like Barty had the same. You had to question her resume the same way. She had won the French. She won Wimbledon. She finally got Australia last year, and she walks away without having ever won the U.S. Open. You would have thought that she would want to fill out that career Grand Slam event resume and win them all, because she was fully capable, and she decided to leave. I understand it. If she didn't want to compete anymore, I just thought it was too bad for historical purposes that she couldn't get that title, have that one in her collection. So that's why there's a big part of me rooting for Azarenka. I love the people that are enduring performers in this sport, and as you said, they back up their early triumphs and come back and win more. And for Azarenka, it would be a wonderful accomplishment.
It sure does, because you mentioned the U.S. Open finals, that she didn't, she didn't get that crown, and I thought she would have. So for her, okay, so what? Let's say it's just the Australian Opens. It'd be like Guga, right? She'd have her 3 Australians, like Guga had his 3 French Opens.
But Guga was, the thing about Guga, Brad, is that he was never going to win Wimbledon for sure.
Absolutely,
and never likely on the fast hard courts at the Open to win there either. And even Australia was a struggle. So you say, okay, Guga was a masterful clay court player who became quite good on other surfaces, won the year-end championships, and finished the year at #1 in 2000. Was a nice accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
He managed to nudge past Safin at the end of that season and secure that #1 ranking, beating Sampras and Agassi indoors back-to-back. So that was nice for Guga. But I never really thought he was going to win one of the other 3 majors. But you look at a Barty, you look at a Justine Henin, those types of players, and you feel like, no, they can play on anything. And therefore, if you're capable of it, you want to see it. You want to see it happen for people like that.
Well, and for Kim Clijsters, it was nice when she came back.
Yeah.
That was a great thing. And in fact, speaking of Kim, when she came back, what was missing from the Slam resume before, when she retired and then when she came back?
Well, hers were all, I guess 3 Opens in Australia. She didn't win. She got narrowly lost to Capriati in that 01
French Open final. But so she
and
had
and then she lost. She lost it. She never won Wimbledon for some reason. But things never went right for Kim at Wimbledon, even though I think with her game she was capable of winning there.
Yeah, exactly. And Kim's like in that boat as well. It's the three. So I thought she added.
Well, in Kim's case, it was the two because she never won Wimbledon.
Right.
And,
so the Australian and the U.S. Open, I thought she added after she retired and came back. I thought she added another major.
No, she added the U.S. and then got the Australian, but not the French, not Wimbledon.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Fine, so it's still a great record.
Yeah. And speaking of which, Kim, when you brought up Justine, it brought back a lot of memories. And then I was thinking about Kim and then the people that had won 3 majors. And thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, that was a loss in 01 to Capriati at the French. I thought she had one in there. But she was a part of another special group of people and a group that you were included in 2017. Steve, you were enshrined in the Hall of Fame that year. But before you went to Newport to be inducted, there was quite an interesting ceremony in Australia. Would you take the listeners through that? And it was, I believe, your first Australian Open as well.
Yeah, no, actually, it was my second.
Okay. Wow, I'm off today. Sorry, folks.
No, I went there for the first time the year before in 2016, and that was a lot of fun. And Djokovic won the title that year, and then Kerber upset Serena in the final. That was a nice debut year for me, and I really had a blast. And then I decided I had to go back the next year. Now, much to my amazement, as I found out in that period leading up to the Australian in late November, I was told that I'd been elected to the Hall of Fame. And then Stan Smith mentioned to me on the phone, he was the president at the time, I don't know if you're coming to Australia, but we're going to announce the class out there on the court. And I said, well, I am coming, and so that turned out to be one of the most gratifying moments of my life, because there were all these champions walking out there: Laver, Rosewall, Chrissy, Martina, Becker, Courier, you name it. And then
John McEnroe, I think.
John McEnroe, Laver, Rosewall. Yeah. It was I believe 27 of us all together. Pat Rafter came out, Fred Stolle, Roy Emerson. It was just an amazing collection of Hall of Famers. And what they did was they quickly announced. Everybody was announced rather briefly, and you walked out on the court, and I came out near the end just before Andy Roddick, who was in my class along with Kim, who was not there. Kim was on film. And
right, I think she was pregnant, maybe something.
Yeah, she just said it was close to the birth of her child, right? And she Then you had Monique Kalkman, the great wheelchair player. She did come over like I did. So Monique and myself and Andy were all there. And walking out on that court and then getting these pictures taken afterwards, where we stood near the Melbourne sign on the court that everybody sees whenever they watch the telecast of the Australian Open. One of the most cherished pictures I have from my entire life. So I thought that was very fortunate for me that there were that many people there that year able to make the picture. One who didn't get in there, who had planned to be there, that I was sorry he didn't, was John Newcombe, because Newcombe was on the original list, but TV demands kept him away. So
that's a shame.
He didn't make it down the ceremony. Of course, Stan Smith, as the president of the Hall of Fame, he was there as well. And
what about Cliff Drysdale? Was he able to?
Cliff Drysdale was there. In fact, Cliff Drysdale, while we were getting the photos taken after the announcements were all made, I could hear him needling Rod Laver about his golf. And in a blizzard of sarcasm, and poor Rod was not hardly able to get a word in. I could hear Rod laughing as Cliff in a genial way harassed him verbally. And that actually was great, Brad, because as you know, a lot of people, you're probably not one of them. Sometimes I have trouble putting the smile on when in front of a camera, whether it's a television camera or just a photograph, because you have to force it. You have to think of something funny. But here I was listening to Cliff behind me with all this, throwing all this stuff at Rod and 2 old cronies going at it. That made me laugh. That made me smile easily just to hear Cliff. And I kidded him about it the next day. And his attitude is that he thinks Rod is the greatest. He loves Rod, but he's not going to treat him any differently than anybody else. And he thinks, and I think that's how Cliff is. It wouldn't matter who it was, but that was a memorable moment, just being a part of that ceremony. And then when it ended, they finished the photos, and suddenly they put the lights back on in the arena. I turn around, there's McEnroe. And
John McEnroe.
John, and he shook my hand and said, congratulations. And he was followed by Michael Chang, who was also at the ceremony. And Michael congratulated me. And then I ended up being a walk off the court with John, talking to him about his brother, Patrick, and what a good guy his brother is. And I said something to him about, well, you know what, John, your brother, I was on Patrick's flight coming over here, and he's such a good guy. And John turned to me and said, he's a good man. And he meant it. He wasn't being sarcastic. He meant it. He loved hearing me say that. So all those things spring to mind because it was such a nice night for me to be a part of.
Steve, it's interesting. I made that comment. That would be John, not Patrick, kind of kiddingly. But thinking about it right now, Patrick, he'll be a candidate. One year, I hope he at least gets nominated with his, being a decent player.
Yeah.
With the Davis Cup, captaincy, winning the Davis Cup. And with all the great work in commentary, like a Cliff Drysdale, I think Patrick definitely is worthy one day to be on the ballot. Yeah,
no, I hear you, and I agree, and I have no doubt he'll get strong consideration.
Yeah, because he continues to just, having that diversity of like Cliff Drysdale had, Butch Buchholz, you're a player of some, I think he was top 30 and he won a title and a good doubles career. So respectable Australian Open semifinalist. Yeah. And that would be in the singles, Steve.
That would be in the singles. That would be correct.
And I believe he was playing against one Boris Becker. Yeah. And Lendl and Edberg finished out the foursome in the other semis.
Yeah. And you remember his line, right?
I have no clue.
He said, he came into the press conference and said, I told you before the tournament, the semifinalists would be Lendl, Becker, Edberg, and McEnroe. and that got a big laugh. And he's always remembered for that. And it's also very much Patrick's type of humor and self-effacing, funny. And that was the highlight of his singles career, no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, he really, he concentrated more on the singles because he was having such good results in doubles. I think he played a lot with Jim Grab, another Stanford guy.
But you know what, Brad? I think we have to commend him. You and I talked about him before. I commend him because it's not easy growing up in the shadows of a renowned brother like John, such a high-profile personality who was in the same field as you are. John was Cup captain before he was. John was doing commentary before he was, or just ahead of him. It's never been that easy, but he's always found a way to be himself, to be comfortable in his own skin, and not to try to develop, not to have the same personality of his brother or compete with his brother. And now they actually work very comfortably together in the booth for ESPN. But I commend Patrick because he's the one in the tougher position of the two.
And not only that, Steve, they also work together at at the academy. I think it's the McEnroe Tennis Academy. So they've continued that lifelong, kind of interesting partnership in the tennis, if you will. Yeah. And yes, he's worthy in his own right because he's accomplished so much on his own. Steve, unfortunately, there's two things that are happening right now. Number one, I'm running out of battery. And number two, we're going to have to wrap this up. I want to just basically say thank you again for coming on. Quickly, a few things that I meant to ask you about just real quick. We didn't see Taylor Fritz or Tiafoe get as far as we had hoped, as well as the Canadian Felix. We didn't see FAA get into the second week. Those were disappointing results for those three guys.
Any of those counts, nor on Denis Shapovalov, but we keep the old play called waiting for Godot. Well, we've been waiting for Chapo for a long time.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And you know what, Brad? No panic in any of these cases. There's many more opportunities ahead. Felix lost the last two sets of his match in tie breaks. Was tough luck in a way, although you wish he would have played better on the biggest points. Tiafoe lost to a kind of a red hot Khachanov here, who backed it up by beating Korda. Even if it was an injured Korda, he still was up at a set, and having won the first set when Korda's injury came, you can't really say that Khachanov didn't have the upper hand. And so you look at those guys now. Who else did? Of course, Fritz. Yep. I left him out. he ran into Poprin, who was just
The
playing
local favorite.
Yeah, home favorite, Aussie crowd, very inspired. Taylor did not play a bad match. This guy on the day was just hitting blind winners and serving incredibly big. And there wasn't that much on the day that Taylor. But if there's one thing I'll say about Taylor Fritz, I've seen it for the last year and a half. He never sits around drowning in a sea of self-pity after these losses. He just gets on with the next tournament. He's got a very good temperament. And I'm not that worried about Tiafoe either, by the way, because Tiafoe, although he blew a big lead in the 4-set tiebreak, should have been in 5 against Khachanov. So be it. He's made a lot of progress. He's coming off a U.S. Open semi, and we'll hear from him a lot more this year. And we will hear from Felix as well. Felix,
and, hey, who knows? It's entirely possible they may have lost to the 23 Australian Open champion. If unlikely,
you never know. But Felix is he's gotten a lot of good counsel from Uncle Tony and his other coaches, and he's very driven. I feel like he's really grown up a lot in the last year, and he finally started winning some tournaments. He broke that 0-8 final round record and started winning at 3 tournaments last fall, and he's on his way. Despite this loss, not worried about him, because on his day he can beat anybody in the world.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. I'm going to have to be on my way, because I'm not sure what happens in the podcast world if your device runs out of juice.
Well, you can't let that happen, Brad. So let's close it out now. And I just want to tell you, listeners, you did a first-rate job hosting this. I enjoyed it immensely, and I look forward to coming on with you again in the future.
Steve, the pleasure was all mine. I sincerely mean that. And that's a deal. Maybe this summer or late spring, depending on your schedule, you'll be at the French, maybe around that time, if that's possible.
I'm sure it is, Brad. We will confer on that, and I'm sure we'll do it.
Excellent, my man. Have a great evening. Enjoy the tennis. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a real fun afternoon for us here in the U.S. Enjoyed the tennis tonight in Australia. And don't forget to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, maybe even throw some extra coin our way. We just want you guys to keep coming back. So thanks a lot again, Steve. Good on you, mate.
Good on you.
All right, ciao.